Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, and today we're asking, what happened to the beta God gun? The gun that ruled them all? Well, I imagine a lot of you don't really have any idea what I'm talking about, as you either didn't play the beta, or didn't watch content about the beta, or whatever else. So let me set the scene for you. During the beta for Battlefield 5, and I believe also the alpha, the STG-44 was an absolute unit. An STG unit. It seemingly melted players at damn near any range, it was easy to use, and it basically mopped the floor with almost everything else for versatility. When something is easy to use and versatile when it comes to range and situations, you essentially have a god gun on your hands, and a significant balancing problem. So the question was asked by many at the time, why bother using anything else? To which DICE thought, well, we better give the STG a few kicks in the dangly swingers before the full game releases. And they did. So where do we find ourselves now where the STG is concerned? What happened to the beta God gun, and how viable an option is it a few months after the full release of the game? Well, let's talk about it. So most lists that analyse the weapons in BF5 have the STG at a C to B tier position, which is right the way down at or near the bottom of the assault class rankings. This is a sentiment that I agree with as well. Now that may confuse some of you out there who like the STG, but just stick with me and I'll explain. Everything I say today is a combination of my personal experiences and statistical data. So while the numbers can't be argued with, that doesn't mean that the STG or any other weapon for that matter is automatically bad or not worth using, etc, for all players. Playstyle and skill set are huge factors, and sometimes guns that aren't top tier just fit exactly how someone likes to play and they can excel with it. On the flip side, sometimes weapons are just fun, even if they aren't objectively good, and that can be reason enough to use them and enjoy them. But if we're talking about straight up how the weapons are designed, the STG is a shadow of its former godlike self. You can still do good work with it. I mean, I had fun using it and played it somewhere around my usual sort of level, but it was harder to do well with than with most other weapons. And the numbers give some clear indicators as to why. And this will all be without even considering that a lot of other weapons have had significant buffs since the beta as well, such as SMGs and shotguns on the whole. So let's take the basic stat of rate of fire of the STG first, 600 rounds per minute, and combine it with its damage that stands at being almost, if not exactly the same, as that of the M1907SF and the Sturmgewehr 1-5. But those two alternative assault options both fire faster, so you're already looking at a time to kill issue. The STG just isn't particularly lethal when compared with other selections. Now usually in FPS games, this is where you can point to the weapon's other strengths as mitigating factors for its significant weakness. But with the STG, if you have experience of analysing such things, you're forced to ask, what strengths are there to point to? Because it's not a particularly stable weapon, especially not if you end up with a specialization tree that I have, something I'll explain later on. And that's why you may see some particularly poor aiming and recoil control today that you're not used to seeing from my content. It was a struggle at times. Although it is important to mention that this is me playing on console. It's pretty obvious that it's harder to aim and control recoil with thumbsticks, but the argument can also be made that while it will be easier to stay on target with the STG using a mouse, it's also therefore easier to stay on target with every other weapon as well. So when you take that out of the equation and instead put in place just better overall accuracy on the whole, then time to kill is even more important a factor, and we've already covered that the STG's time to kill isn't particularly special. So if the STG is lacking for lethality and stability, what does it have? Well, there is the 31 round magazine. That's pretty good for the assault class, although you'll be expending those rounds more quickly than with certain other options of course, due to the STG being a full auto weapon, firing faster than the semi-autos, and probably needing to fire more shots on average due to having less accuracy in a lot of situations. So that's a minor strength that also has an inherent weakness. But there must be something, right? Why is it in the game if it doesn't have a clear statistical strength? Well, it does have something, and that is that it's familiar to most players and is easy to use at a base level. That might sound a bit confusing, so I'll explain. The STG is basically your standard assault rifle or automatic weapon from almost any first-person shooter. It does what you'd expect. Pretty much every FPS game out there has a weapon or weapons that are just okay. They behave in a very familiar manner across the board, and they don't require much skill to use to a decent degree. That's the STG in Battlefield 5. The balancing factor is that ease of use to achieve decent or average results means it's going to be harder to truly excel with it. It doesn't have standout strengths. It has a lower skill floor, which means it has a lower skill ceiling. It's not a truly min-maxed weapon, it's just okay. It being fairly simplistic in nature is its strength. So yeah, you can just run about, you can hold the trigger down when you see anyone at close to close mid-range, it It fires fast enough to kill if you land your shots decently, but also it doesn't fire fast enough that it's flying around everywhere without decent recoil control. But against a better opponent or someone who has mastered a weapon that's more lethal in that specific situation, then the STG user loses. See what I'm saying? It's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, whilst at the same time not being all that versatile either. Kind of the worst of both worlds, really. It's just decent. Sometimes being decent at a number of things is great, but in this instance, it's outclassed by a lot of weapons in close quarters and totally destroyed by many weapons at range. Plus it lacks a bipod, a truly huge magazine, or whatever else to mitigate any of this. This is actually why I'm using this sight on it. That sounds totally random, but there is method to the madness. Some of you may have sat there so far and exclaimed that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not using it right, that that's not the right sight for the weapon, and whatever else. But I'm using the mid-range scope for a reason. Another sight may well be better for certain situations, but I went for the mid-range scope due to being used to it, due to the STG not really being all that great in close quarters anyway, and I figured, well, I may as well get the benefit of being able to check areas and see more clearly then, even if it doesn't fit the weapon all that well, because the weapon isn't great anyway overall, especially, again, not at close range, where a different sight would be more beneficial. If you wanted to utilize the STG purely at close to close mid-range, then the iron sights may well be better for you, etc. I personally can still hit my shots up close with this scope, but it would be easier sometimes to use something else. Yet, it doesn't feel worthwhile putting all of my eggs in that basket, as it isn't a properly min-maxed option. And using the mid-range scope did allow me to utilize one certain aspect of the STG that I feel gets ignored most of the time, the alternate fire mode. Some weapons can fire in full auto and semi-auto, and the STG is one of those. You may have noticed some clips today, and hopefully will notice more now I've mentioned it, where I'm tap firing. This makes the STG a better range option. It's not good at it, but it's better than when using full auto. So tap firing in semi-auto and using the mid-range scope does add a little extra versatility, although this still doesn't pull it up from its lowly position, something I'll cover in a couple of other analysis points soon. But let's talk about that frustrating specialization setup I talked about earlier. Now this is a personal preference thing, it won't apply to everyone, but for me, the STG specialization tree sucks. So you can see here how I have mine set up. Now why am I using the left side for the middle choices, which includes enhanced grips, when I appear to be a very aim down sight reliant player and the STG is destroyed by SMGs for hipfire anyway? Well, it's because the left side has lightened stock for faster movement while aiming. I love this specialization on almost anything that can have it, but that's not the reason I've gone for it this time. It's because I feel like I borderline need it on this weapon. Because if you put everything together, it's not that great in CQC, it's not that accurate at longer ranges, it's got nothing on SMGs and shotguns at genuinely close range, so some extra strafe speed could be pretty key, whether it be for having gunfights at close quarters and being a harder target to hit, or for checking areas at longer ranges. You don't want to be a slow moving target, especially if you're just ADSing to look into the distance to see if you can spot anyone in this game with pretty poor visibility. And yet if someone then sees you at range with a semi-auto or something, you likely can't compete. Without lightened stock, the STG feels weak, limiting, and clunky to me, but selecting lightened stock means you can't have ported barrel or barrel bedding, which means no reduced horizontal recoil and also no improved accuracy while stationary and in aim fire. So it's unwieldy, as I alluded to earlier. It can feel a little bit like it's kicking everywhere, and basically it feels like there's no synergy. I like to set my specializations up to synergize with the weapon, and I feel like there's no way to truly do that for the STG without severely limiting it even further in certain ways. Whatever combination I pick, it just still feels mediocre. It's just still not that good. And that's without mentioning that at the bottom I went for recoil buffer for less upwards recoil, because it would be all over the damn place without it as well. But that means I couldn't take custom stock for improved accuracy while moving and aiming, so I couldn't synergize with lightened stock without having truly poor recoil. In fact, the only way to achieve decent synergy really, from what I can tell, is to use all stability improving specializations and just play in a much more passive and less mobile fashion. Lots of stationary firing, lots of head glitching, lots of laning, etc. But then why not just use a semi-auto and do that but better? What's the point in the STG if you're gonna play like that? And with the concept of judging via comparisons in mind, let's do some very specific ones. So the STG versus the Sturmgewehr 1-5. Well, the Sturmgewehr 1-5 has pretty much the same damage but fires faster at 670 RPM. It's a more close range orientated weapon for sure, but honestly that just makes it a better min-max or specific situation option. Although the Sturmgewehr isn't as good at range, the STG isn't a great range weapon anyway, so overall the Sturmgewehr beats it at close range whilst also arguably having a better potential specialization setup. If you wanted to be better at longer ranges, you'd just pick something other than the Sturm or the STG anyway. So what about the STG versus the M1907SF? Well, the M1907 embarrasses the STG at close range. The STG just gets mauled due to the M1907 firing 170 rounds per minute faster, and also actually does alright at longer ranges with semi-auto fire, or just if you can control the recoil well. It's super easy to control, and you can spam the trigger as much as you want, as I demonstrated in my recent video specifically about the M1907. So it calls into question why you'd bother with the STG where that's concerned. It loses the M1907SF at close range by a long way, and semi-auto fire benefits both of them at longer ranges in a similar fashion, with the STG not being good enough at long range to make up for the M1907 being so much better at close range. But what about the STG versus the Ribbe Relais 1918? Well, the Ribbe is ridiculously accurate. It fires 60 RPM slower than the STG, but besides that, it's a far better min-max option again, actually serving a clear purpose. It's an automatic weapon that remains accurate and also has a bipod, making for a unique assault option. It fills a gap that nothing else does, whereas the STG is just your basic assault rifle. It's just there, you know what to do with it, it'll do that, and that's about it. And then for the STG versus all semi-autos. It's not a fair fight, it's not even close. The semi-autos destroy the STG from a balance standpoint. This is a semi-auto dominated game. It's the reason why you see so many people using them. It's also why you barely ever see the STG, the M1907, etc. by comparison. The semi-autos are super simple to use, have low recoil generally, are very accurate, have decent kill times, and are versatile, being able to compete at the vast majority of ranges. From a performance standpoint, they render the STG almost pointless. So I'm sure you get the message. From purely an efficiency and performance point of view, the STG is no more than a mediocre pick. It's gone from being the god gun of the beta to your generic FPS assault rifle, with both a low skill floor and a low skill ceiling. It can still be utilized well, and the results a player enjoys still hinge overall on their own ability levels and game knowledge, but the STG can only take you so far and has no specific strengths other than being simplistic. But if you enjoy the STG, then obviously that's totally cool, and you should use whatever you like and whatever helps you to do well. I personally had fun collecting the footage for this video, even if I didn't think the gun was particularly great, and really it's fun that matters overall. So what do you think? Do you enjoy the STG? Do you remember its godlike form in the beta? And what's your go-to assault weapon these days? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join my Discord server in the description and my pinned comment. Here's the board of awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes and love them all deeply and often. If you want to join them on the board of awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters.